My oldest son called at 11:47 p.m. He worked for the FBI, and the first thing he told me was to hide in the attic and not say a word to Derek. My name is Robert Henderson. I am 64 years old, and I used to believe the worst thing that could happen to me that year had already happened. I had lost my wife of 41 years to a stroke in the middle of March. Margaret had been making coffee on a Tuesday morning, and by Thursday, she was gone. 41 years together ended in the space of 2 days, and after that, the house went quiet in a way I had never known a house could be quiet. For a while, I thought grief was the whole story. I thought loneliness was the enemy I had to survive. I was wrong. That November night, when my phone lit up at 11:47 p.m., I saw my oldest son's name on the screen, Marcus. 38 years of being his father had taught me every version of his voice. I knew when he was tired. I knew when he was careful. I knew when he was holding something back. But the voice on the other end of that call was one I had never heard before. He told me to listen. He told me to turn off every light in my room. He told me to get to the attic, lock the door from the inside, and not call Amy. Then he said the part that turned the blood in my body cold. He told me not to say a word to Derek. To understand how I ended up sitting on the floor of that dark attic while my son-in-law destroyed documents beneath me, I have to go back 8 months. After Margaret died, my daughter Amy called me every day for the first 2 weeks. At first, the calls were simple. She asked if I had eaten. She asked if I had slept. She asked whether I had remembered to take the trash cans out, because Margaret had always been the one who remembered which week was recycling and which week was yard waste. Then the calls changed. Amy asked me to come stay with her and Derek. She told me they had the room. She told me I should not be rattling around the old house alone. I almost said no. I am not the kind of man who moves in with his children. I spent 40 years fixing engines and electrical systems. I ran my own shop for 30 of those years. I had built my life around figuring things out with my own hands. But Amy kept calling. She did not push. She did not beg. She just kept saying she wanted me close. Then one day, she said Margaret would have wanted it that way. That was the part that got me. I packed 2 bags, locked up the old house, and drove 60 miles to the western suburbs of Nashville. Amy and Derek's house was the kind of place that made you slow down when you passed it. A green lawn, a white picket fence with something flowering along it, an old copper watering can hanging beside the garage door, the kind of little detail that tells you someone cares about how things look. I stood in the driveway for a moment and thought my daughter had built something good. Derek came outside before I reached the front door. He took both bags out of my hands, asked whether I wanted coffee or something stronger, and told me that this was my home now, for as long as I wanted it to be. At the time, I had no reason not to take him at his word. The room they gave me was clean, with a window facing the garden. I set Margaret's photo on the nightstand. I had done that every night for 41 years, and I was not about to stop just because she was gone. Then I unpacked and told myself this arrangement would be fine. I did not notice, not then, that the room had been arranged so that from my doorway I could not see Derek's home office. At the time, it meant nothing to me. Later, I understood that nothing in that house was accidental. The first week, I slept better than I had any right to sleep. Amy cooked dinner. Derek cleaned up afterward. The 3 of us would sit at the table for a while after eating. Derek asked about my years as a mechanic. He asked about the shop I had run. He asked good questions, and he listened to the answers. He was the kind of man who knew how to make another man feel heard. I noticed that. Then I started hearing the 1 a.m. phone calls. Not every night, just sometimes. But when they happened, Derek's voice was different. Low, clipped, tight in a way that did not match a man having a routine business conversation. I mentioned it to Amy the next morning. I kept my tone easy, as if I were only asking. She smiled and told me Derek had calls with partners overseas. Time zones were a nightmare for him, she said. I nodded because I was the newcomer. My wife had been in the ground for 8 months. The last thing I needed to become was the father-in-law who moved in and immediately started making trouble. Then one evening, the Pattersons came to dinner. They were neighbors, nice enough people. Halfway through the meal, Derek spoke gently, with what looked like genuine concern. He said Amy's dad sometimes read things the wrong way, but that it was completely understandable after losing Margaret. Grief did that to people, he said. Then he looked at me and gave me the warmest smile in the room. Every face at that table went soft with sympathy. I set my fork down, looked at Derek, and told him I appreciated the concern, but I was sitting right there. For 3 seconds, nobody said anything. Then Derek smiled again and moved on. I spent 40 years in a shop diagnosing problems that other people insisted were not there. I know what it looks like when someone is managing you instead of talking to you. After that dinner, Amy became more careful about what she said in front of the neighbors. I stopped saying much at all. During my third week there, I went up to the attic to look for Amy's old Christmas boxes. The stairs were narrow, old, dry, and loud under my boots. A single bulb hung at the top, just enough light to show the cardboard boxes stacked along the walls. The floorboards had seen better days. They were warped and gapped in places, the way old wood gets when a house has breathed through enough seasons. In a few spots, the gaps were wide enough that I could see the living room light below. I stood over one of those gaps and looked down. I had a clear view of the coffee table, the leather sofa, and the corner where Derek usually set his laptop. Then I heard footsteps at the bottom of the stairs. Derek looked up at me and said he would get whatever I needed from the attic. He said it was dusty up there, and those stairs were not great for the knees. His voice was pitched just right, helpful, considerate. I came down, thanked him, went back to my room, and thought about one simple thing. I had never mentioned anything about my knees. I did not bring it up with Amy. I did not bring it up with anyone. But from that day on, every time I walked past the bottom of those attic stairs, I stopped for a second and thought about the gaps in the floorboards. 3 months later, I would not forget them. Marcus came to visit one Sunday in September. He drove up without making a big thing of it and brought a six-pack and a bag of food from the barbecue place I liked. Amy was in the shower, and Derek was in his office with the door closed, so Marcus and I sat at the kitchen table for a while. Through the whole afternoon, I noticed that Marcus and Derek barely looked at each other. It was not hostile. It was something quieter than that. Two men being careful not to create an opening that would need to be filled. After lunch, while Derek cleaned up, Marcus walked me out to the yard. It was still warm for September. We stood near the fence, away from the windows. He asked if I was doing all right there. He asked how it felt. I told him it was fine. Derek was a little odd sometimes, that was all. Marcus nodded once. He did not ask odd in what way. He did not explain anything either. Before he left, he pulled me aside near his car and kept his voice low. He asked whether I was keeping my phone charged at night. He told me to make sure it was full every night before I went to sleep. I looked at him. He gave me the same easy expression he had used his whole life when he did not want me to read him. Then he drove away. I stood in the yard and watched his car disappear around the corner with one question in my head. Why would a 38-year-old FBI agent ask his father to keep his phone charged? I did not sleep well that night, but I did not yet know what I was waiting for. In October, I found an envelope on Derek's desk. I was not looking for it. I was passing his office while carrying a toolbox I had used to fix the loose hinge on the back door. The office door had drifted open, and the envelope was lying flat on the desk. It had been opened and resealed with care. The return address in the upper left corner said Department of Justice. The first visible line said, Notice of Investigation. I did not read any further. I set the toolbox down, walked out, and pulled the door to behind me. My hands were steady, and that steadiness surprised me. That evening, Derek asked where I had been all afternoon. His voice was normal. His eyes were not. I told him I had been fixing the back door hinge. I said it had been bothering me since I got there. It was not the whole truth. That was the first time I cheated something with Derek, and I felt nothing about it except a kind of cool clarity, like a gauge reading I trusted. That night, I called Marcus. He picked up on the second ring. I told him I had found something on Derek's desk. I told him it was an envelope from the Department of Justice, a notice of investigation, and that I had not read the body of it. There was silence. 4 seconds. 5. Then Marcus asked if I had put it back the same way. I said yes. He told me good. Then he told me not to say anything about it, not even to Amy. I asked if he knew what it was. He told me he was working it. Then he said the same thing he had said before. Keep your phone charged. Then he hung up. I sat in the dark in my room and thought about what kind of man was sleeping in the same house as my daughter. That Friday morning, I came into the kitchen and found Amy standing at the sink without moving. Her shoulders were tight. When I put a hand on her arm, she startled. Her credit card had been declined at the grocery store the day before. She had left the cart in the aisle and walked out. She tried to brush it off. She said it was probably a bank glitch. She said those things happened. I asked if she had her own account. She shook her head. It was a joint account, she said. Derek managed it. He was better with the financial side of things. I asked if she knew the current balance. She was quiet for a long time. A man who ran a shop for 30 years knows what that silence means. I did not push her further that morning. But that afternoon, while Amy was at work and Derek was gone, I sat in my room and laid everything out the way I would lay out a diagnostic. Every symptom in order. The 1 a.m. phone calls. The copper watering can by the garage, hanging in the same spot since I arrived, never touched. The envelope from the Department of Justice. My daughter unable to tell me what was in her own bank account. I called Marcus and told him about the card, the account, and what Amy had not been able to answer. He listened all the way through. Then he asked if Derek had said anything about travel, international travel, specifically. I told him no, but 2 weeks earlier, Derek had offered to set me up in a rental cottage down in Florida, 1 month paid up front. There were 3 seconds of quiet. Then Marcus told me I had done right by staying. He told me not to go anywhere. That phrase was the first time I understood this was not Marcus checking on his father. This was something else. A week later, Derek made a second offer. This time, it was a cabin outside Asheville. 2 weeks paid, keys waiting. He told me I needed the air and that the house was a lot for a man still grieving. The house was perfectly quiet. Nothing about it was a lot. I looked at the booking confirmation he had printed. Check-in was Monday. I thanked him and told him I was not going anywhere right then. My family was there. He nodded. He smiled. He folded the paper and put it back in his pocket. From that day on, his office door was locked every morning before breakfast. Every single morning. That night, I lay in the dark and ran it through my mind the way I would run a diagnostic on an engine that was not performing right, slow, and complete. Derek had known about my knees before I mentioned them. He had tried to get me out of the house twice in 3 weeks. There was a federal investigation notice on his desk. My daughter was locked out of her own finances. And Marcus, my son, the FBI agent, was asking questions that a son did not ask about his brother-in-law. I set my phone on the nightstand at full charge. For the first time in 8 weeks, I did not tell myself I was reading it wrong. I just waited. On Monday of the following week, Derek locked his office at 7:31 a.m., before coffee, before Amy was up. I stood in the hallway and listened to the deadbolt. That door had always only been closed before. The sound of the lock was new. I carried that sound in my head all morning. That afternoon, Amy came home and mentioned that Derek had canceled my Asheville booking and refunded everything. I said nothing, but I started keeping a log. Not evidence. I am not a lawyer. I am a mechanic, and mechanics write things down because memory lies. Derek's arrival times, the times the office locked, calls that cut short when I came down the hall. Tuesday, locked at 7:31. Wednesday, locked at 7:18. Call ended at 3:44 p.m. Thursday, home after 9:30 p.m. No explanation offered, none asked for. I did not tell Amy. She was holding things together in the way people do when they are afraid to look too closely at what they are holding. I was not going to be the one to make her look. Not yet. My third call to Marcus came on a weekday afternoon when the house was mine. He asked directly if Derek had mentioned any travel, particularly international. I told him no, but that Derek had locked the office every morning since Monday, and that he had canceled my booking himself. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he told me to keep my routine exactly the same. Eat at the table, talk normally. He asked if I could do that. I told him I had run a shop for 30 years. I knew how to hold a poker face. Something came out in his exhale. It was not relief exactly, but it was close. He told me he knew I could. Then he said that was why he had called me first. After I hung up, I sat at the window for a while. The white fence was outside. The copper watering can by the garage was still in the same spot it had been since I arrived. The grass could have used another week before cutting. Marcus was working something. I was part of it without being told how, and I understood, the same way I understood when a young mechanic in my shop needed room to figure out a problem, that the best thing I could do was stay exactly where I was and not spook anything. So I went to the kitchen and started making dinner. When Derek came home at 6, I put a plate in front of him and asked about his day. He talked. I listened. I gave him nothing worth reading. I was sitting across from a man I did not know, making small talk, passing the salt, asking about traffic on I-65, while whatever Marcus was building somewhere I could not see. If you have ever had to hold still when every instinct in you said to act, then you know what that table felt like. Late October brought the part I still do not tell easily. One night, Derek was out, and Amy and I sat in the kitchen with the radio low. She did not say anything for a while. She just sat there with her coffee. Then she told me Derek had been different lately. He would not talk to her about money anymore. He kept saying he was handling it and she should let him handle it. I waited. Then she looked at me and asked if I thought something was wrong with him. I looked at my daughter. She had her mother's face. She had the same way of wanting to believe the best of people. She had carried that in her since she was small. I did not tell her I had been watching things for 2 months. I asked if she trusted him. She was quiet long enough that the question answered itself. I put my hand over hers and did not say anything else. There are things people already know. They just have not said them out loud yet, not to themselves and not to anyone else. Amy was not foolish. Amy was frightened. From the outside, those two things can look the same. They are not the same. At 3 in the morning that Wednesday, I woke up dry-mouthed and went downstairs for water. The hallway was dark, and by then I had memorized every step. I cut through the living room toward the kitchen and stopped. Derek was standing in the dark with no lights on, looking out the window at the street. His hands were in his pockets. He heard me and turned around. He asked if I could not sleep. His voice was normal enough for 3 in the morning in a dark room. I told him the same thing. I said I was getting water. I went to the kitchen, filled a glass, drank it, set it in the rack, went back upstairs, and locked my door. It was the first time I had locked it since arriving. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at my phone. 91%. I plugged it in. Then I thought about what I had just seen. A man standing in the dark at 3 in the morning, not reading, not on his phone, not pacing, not doing anything except watching the street outside. Not insomnia, not restlessness. Waiting. I spent 30 years diagnosing systems. When something is running wrong, there is always a reason. You just have to be patient enough to find it. From that night on, I kept my boots near the bed. Not fear, preparation. There is a difference, and at 64, I know which is which. In early November, Marcus texted me one afternoon. He said he was planning to come by that weekend. I texted back, telling him I would not mention it. He replied that he understood. That weekend, Marcus did not come. Saturday morning, he sent another message saying plans had shifted, then asked if I was good. I told him I was there. I understood the way you understand after working long enough to know that sometimes a job changes while it is already running, and the best move is to stay at your post. So I stayed at mine. I made dinner. I watched the game with Derek on Friday night. I said the right things at the right moments. I answered his questions about my health in the voice of a man with nothing on his mind. Outside, the copper watering can still hung by the garage in the same spot it had been since September. Not once had anyone taken it down to use it. Not once had anyone moved it. I had stopped thinking of it as decoration. Some things stay in one place not because they belong there, but because whoever put them there stopped living in the house a long time ago. The office door. The finances. The 1 calls. None of it was coincidence. None of it ever had been. During the last week of October, Derek started being present everywhere, not aggressive, smooth. If Amy and I started talking in the kitchen, Derek would come in for a glass of water and sit down. If we planned a walk, he wanted to come along. If Amy invited me upstairs to look through some of her mother's things she had kept, 15 minutes later there would be a knock on the door. Derek would ask Amy to help him with something real quick. Amy would go. She would not come back. I would sit with whatever we had been going through, then put it away. Then one afternoon, Derek was out, and I knocked on Amy's door. She was on a call and held up a finger. I waited in the hall. 7 minutes later, I heard Derek's truck in the driveway. Amy heard it at the same time. She looked toward the window, then back at me. She told me to go to my room. Derek did not like it when we talked too long. She said it with the ease of someone who had said it so many times that it had stopped sounding like what it was. I stood in that hallway and watched her close the door. I did not blame her. I had seen enough over the years to know what it looks like when someone has been slowly convinced that the safest thing to do is manage the people around them before someone else has to. Amy was not weak. Amy was adapted. Derek does not like it when we talk too long. I thought about that sentence for the rest of the week. That Thursday, I was sitting at the kitchen table going through paperwork, insurance forms I had been putting off since Margaret died. I had taken the chair by the corner cabinet because the light there was decent. When I stood up, my hand caught the gap between the cabinet and the wall. There was a piece of paper folded back there. It had been there a while. The edge was slightly soft with humidity, the kind of thing that falls behind furniture and stays there. I opened it. It was a page from a wire transfer document. Account numbers, dates, dollar amounts that made me read the line twice and then a third time. At the top was Amy Henderson Voss, joint account holder. Not a joint account the way most people understand it. Not the kind where two people sit down and agree what they are doing. The kind an accountant sets up so a name appears on paperwork in the right places at the right times, while the other person has no idea what they have been signed onto. I folded the page and slid it into my shirt pocket. My hands did not move any differently. I had delivered bad news enough times to customers and to Margaret's family at the hospital to know that the moment after you understand something terrible, you still have to decide what to do next. I called Marcus. He did not pick up. I looked out the kitchen window at the copper watering can. My daughter's name was on documents she had never seen, and if everything came down, she could come down with it. The next week, things started disappearing. Small things at first. The old laptop Derek kept on the office shelf was gone. A stack of document boxes in the corner disappeared, leaving only dust rectangles on the floor. An external drive that had been plugged into his monitor was gone. I logged it and said nothing. On Wednesday, Derek announced over dinner that he had a business trip to Chicago. 5 days starting Monday. A big project. He needed to be there in person. Amy told him to pack his heavy coat because Chicago in November would knock him flat. Derek smiled and said it was already on the list. I watched him eat. His hands were easy. His eyes were on his plate, but he was not tracking nothing. He was tracking everything. The next afternoon, I saw him in the garage standing over an open duffel bag on the floor. He was not packing it. He was just looking into it, the way a man looks at something when he has done his final check and is deciding whether he has forgotten anything. Marcus had asked me weeks earlier whether Derek had mentioned international travel. Chicago was not international, but Chicago can be a lot of things. I called Marcus that evening. He picked up immediately. I told him Derek said he was heading to Chicago on Monday. There was one beat of silence. Then Marcus asked if I could hold routine through the weekend. I told him same as always. I asked how long. He told me I did not need that number. Then he told me to keep the phone charged. Friday morning, I was out front deadheading the potted plants Amy kept by the porch steps. I had taken that on without being asked. I needed something useful to do with my hands. Mrs. Patterson came by along the fence. She brought cookies sometimes. She was a good neighbor with sharp eyes. She asked how I was holding up. Then she said she had seen the lights on late at our house pretty often. I told her I was managing fine and asked about her husband's back. Then, in the same tone she might have used to mention the weather, she said there had been a strange dark sedan parked down at the end of the block for 3 or 4 weeks. It did not belong to anyone on the street. Whoever was in it never got out. It just sat there for a few hours, then disappeared, then came back. I told her I could not say I knew whose it was, but I appreciated her mentioning it. She nodded and moved on. I stood there with the clippers in my hand for a moment. A dark sedan at the end of the block for 3 weeks. I understood. Not entirely, but enough. I was not the only one watching that house. Whatever Marcus had built around Derek Voss was already further along than I had been allowed to know. I went inside, made coffee, and sat down with it. For the first time since I had arrived, I did not feel like I was standing in it alone. On Saturday, 2 days before Derek said he was leaving, Amy made spaghetti. She had always made spaghetti when she wanted a good evening, same as her mother. Candles on the table. Derek opened a bottle of wine. He was warm all through dinner. He asked about my years at the shop. He told a story about a coworker that made Amy laugh. I laughed where it made sense. It looked like a normal dinner. Then I watched his hands. His fork was in his right hand, but he was not eating much. His eyes kept drifting toward the window, not focused on anything. Every couple of minutes, he glanced down at his phone, face down on his thigh. He did not pick it up. He only checked that it was there. He was waiting for something. After dinner, he went down to the garage and shut the door. I stayed in the kitchen to help Amy with the dishes. From there, I could hear keyboard sounds coming up through the floor. Steady, fast, continuous. 40 minutes. Amy told me about something that had happened at school that day. I listened to her, and I listened to the garage. I went upstairs at 10. I left my boots on. I put my phone on the pillow at full charge. Then I stared at the ceiling for a while. I did not know what was coming, or exactly when. I knew the watering can had not moved in 3 months. I knew the office locked every morning. I knew Derek was typing in the garage at 10:30 on a Saturday night. I closed my eyes, but I did not sleep. At 10:30, the house was quiet. Amy's light had gone off at 15:15. The keyboard sounds from the garage had stopped around 10. I heard footsteps through the house, then nothing. I lay in the dark with Margaret's photo on the nightstand beside me. I could see the shape of the frame, even without light. 41 years of knowing exactly where it was. We had never been wealthy. We had never had more house than we needed. But I had always known the woman I built my life with. I had known her completely. I said something to the dark. I did not say it out loud, but I said it. At 11, Derek still had not come upstairs. I heard him in the hall, the refrigerator, somewhere else, not the stairs. At 11:20, the television came on low in the living room. At 11:30, the television went off. Then there were steps toward the office. A key. I sat up. My phone was on the pillow. 98%. I watched the screen. Aransprzecie. Patruzec, she shoptepe. It lit up. Marcus. I answered before it rang twice. He told me to listen. His voice was tight in a way I had never heard. He told me to turn off every light in my room right then. He told me to get to the attic and lock the door from the inside. He told me not to call Amy and not to say anything to Derek. I started to say his name. He cut me off and told me to go. 20 minutes, he said. I got up, turned off the lights, and opened my door into a dark hall. There was a line of light under the office door below. I moved down the hall one step at a time without sound. I had walked through enough dark garages and crawl spaces to know how to move without making an announcement. The attic stairs were at the end of the hall. I went up, stepping along the edges of each tread. Old wood talks less at the edges. 40 years of working in buildings that needed quiet had taught me that. I got into the attic, shut the door, and locked it. Complete dark. Below me, through the gaps between the old floorboards, I could see the light from Derek's office. I sat down on the floor, silenced my phone, put it in my chest pocket, and looked through the gap. Derek was at the fold-out work table he kept for extra space. His laptop was open and bright. Around him were stacked documents sorted in some kind of order. He was typing fast. He would stop, read, and type again. Then he brought out something I had not seen before, a portable shredder on wheels. He plugged it in and switched it on. Then came the sound of paper being destroyed. He fed documents into it one at a time. There was no rush. He was methodical. Look it over. Insert it. Wait. Next page. The way a man works when he has done it before and knows exactly how long it takes. His phone rang. He looked at it and did not answer. It rang again. The third time, he picked up and said 7 words. He said he was handling it and not to call that number. Then he hung up. I sat on that attic floor and counted. 20 minutes, Marcus had said. The shredder ran. Derek fed it page after page, steady and unhurried, moving like a man executing a plan he had practiced so many times that it had become procedure. I did not move. I made no sound. I counted. Then Derek stopped shredding. He straightened and looked at the ceiling. 1 second. 2. I held my breath. He looked back down, not toward the stairs, only with the internal checklist expression of a man making sure he had not missed anything. Then he walked to the corner cabinet and opened the bottom drawer. He pulled out a thick envelope, opened it, and removed a passport. It was not blue. It was dark, reddish-brown. I could see it clearly from above. He opened it to the photo page, looked at it, and gave one small nod. It was the nod of a man confirming something he already knew, not discovering something new. Then he folded it shut and slid it into the inside pocket of his jacket. I put my hand flat over my mouth. There was no noise in my head. No questions firing everywhere. Just one sentence, clear and cold as a gauge reading at 0. Amy had no idea who she had married. Outside, a car came down the street. Not a neighborhood car. Different weight, different speed. It slowed. It stopped. Silence. Then 3 knocks hit the front door. Firm. Evenly spaced. The knock of people who are certain they will be answered. A voice outside identified the FBI and ordered the door open. Derek went still. I watched him through the gap, standing in the middle of the room with his arms at his sides. He looked toward the front door. Then he looked up at the ceiling, checking, then down at his own hands. 3 seconds. He did not run. He walked to the door and opened it. Flashlight beams came in from outside. Men and women in dark jackets stood under the porch light with FBI across their backs. There was no shouting, no drawn weapons. Just a flat, even voice, the voice of people who do this as a job. They told Derek they had a federal warrant and ordered him to step out. He stepped out with his hands up. From the hallway above, I heard Amy's door open. Bare feet on hardwood. A sharp breath, the kind that comes when a person sees something their brain needs a moment to process. She said Derek's name. Her voice was half asleep and not yet understanding. I will not describe it further. Some sounds a father keeps to himself. From the attic, I could not see her face. I could only see her shadow at the top of the stairs, one hand against the wall. Then came the sound of handcuffs. Derek said a few quiet words that did not carry. Then there was nothing from him. I stood, went to the attic door, unlocked it, and came down into the organized quiet of people doing their work. Agents moved through the house without rushing and without theater. Evidence bags for the laptop, the phones, the external drives, the shredder tagged and moved aside. Everything documented. Marcus was at the front door. When I came down the stairs, he looked up and gave me one nod. We did not need more than that. Amy was in the middle of the living room in pajamas, her hair loose, both hands pressed to her face. I walked over and put my hand on her shoulder. She turned and put her head against my chest, the way she had when she was 8 years old, and something had gone badly wrong at school, before she learned to hold herself together in front of other people. She said I had known. It was not a question. I told her I had not known everything. I had known enough to stay. She did not say anything after that. We stood there while the agents worked around us. Derek was already outside. It was the first time since I arrived that my daughter let me simply be her father. Outside, the edge of the November sky had begun to go gray. The FBI stayed until 3:15 a.m. A female agent sat with Amy and walked her through what came next. She was calm and thorough, the kind of professional you are grateful exists. She explained the lawyer, the frozen accounts. She explained that Amy's name on the documents would be reviewed, but that no signature of hers appeared on any illegal transaction, and that this would matter. Amy listened to every word. Her eyes were dry by then, with the look of someone taking inventory. I sat beside her and said nothing. My job at that moment was to be in the chair. At 4 in the morning, the last agents left. Marcus was the last one out. He stopped at the door and asked if I was all right. I told him I was. He told me to get some sleep because tomorrow would start early. By 8 in the morning, Amy's phone was ringing. The neighbors had seen the vehicles. Messages came from her coworkers and friends, not gossip, concern. Mrs. Patterson knocked at 9 with a tin of cookies. At 9:15, Derek's mother called. Amy looked at the screen, then at me. I did not move. I did not nod. It was her call. She turned the phone face down on the table. That was her answer. 3 days later, Amy started going through things. She was not looking for evidence. Her lawyer had been clear about that. She was looking at what she remembered. She sat with wedding albums. She read back through old messages. She held moments up to a light she had not asked for. One evening, she put her phone down and asked if I thought he had ever actually loved her. I sat with that for a moment. I told her that was a question she would work out in time, not that night. She nodded. Not in agreement. It was the nod of someone too worn down to push. Then she asked when I knew something was wrong. I told her I did not know. I suspected. I told her I kept it to myself because I was not certain and because it was her life. She said I should have told her. Maybe, I said. I told her I had gotten that part wrong. She looked at me the way a daughter looks at a father when she is angry and grateful at the same time and cannot separate the two. Then she leaned against my arm. I did not tell her I had known from the first week that something was wrong. That would not have done her any good. And I did not tell her everything was going to be fine, because I did not know that, and she deserved not to be managed anymore. Amy took weeks before she began asking the questions that actually mattered. During the second week after that night, Derek's mother called Amy. I only heard Amy's side of the conversation. I was sitting across the lunch table, watching my daughter's face move through several emotions at once. She said she heard her. Then she said her lawyer. There was a long pause. Then she said, with all due respect, another pause. After 3 minutes, Amy said she had to go. She set the phone down and looked at her food. Derek's mother had told her not to cooperate with the investigation for the sake of the family. I waited. Amy asked whose family. She said it to the air, not to me. Then she asked what kind of family asked someone to cover for a man who had put her name on documents she never agreed to. She stood and went to her room. 15 minutes later, she came back with her phone and called her lawyer. She stood in the hallway, with her voice low and clear. She did not ask me. She did not ask Marcus. She decided it herself. I sat at the kitchen table and watched her through the doorway. She was going to be all right. Not because I could see the future, because I knew that voice. I had heard it in her mother. I had heard it in Marcus. It was the voice a Henderson used when they were done waiting for permission. Marcus stayed 3 more days. He did not fill the silence with much. He made coffee in the mornings. He helped Amy sort through the immediate paperwork. He was present in the way men in our family are present when things are bad. On Tuesday night, after Amy was asleep, he sat with me in the kitchen. He told me he had not been able to read me in on it. I told him I knew. He said Derek's name had come up 18 months earlier in another case. Marcus had a conflict because Derek was family. He reported it and stepped off. I told him he had still kept watching. He said he had not been authorized to watch. He had been authorized to warn me. I looked at my son, 38 years old, sitting under the kitchen light, carrying the particular tiredness of a man who has held something heavy for a long time without being able to set it down. I told him he had trusted me to hold my end. He said he knew I would. I told him he was more than that. He said he did not need to be. I made 2 more coffees. We sat in the kitchen for a while. November, cold outside, quiet inside, and for the first time since Margaret died, I did not feel like the house I was in belonged to someone else. The copper watering can was still hanging by the garage. Neither of us had taken it down. 4 weeks into the investigation, we learned that the man we had known as Derek Voss was not Derek Voss at all. His real name was Raymond Earl Castillo. He was 39 years old and originally from Georgia. 9 years earlier, he had walked away from a fraud case in Savannah. It had been small enough that he did not immediately make a national list, but large enough that he knew he had to become somebody else. He built a new identity, moved to Tennessee, and started over. This time, the numbers were much bigger. 12 federal counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of identity fraud, bail denied because of prior flight and because of the foreign passport found in his jacket on the night of his arrest. The joint account was frozen. Amy lost access for 4 months while every transaction was traced. Her signature appeared on nothing illegal, but it took another 6 months to make that official. I covered her expenses during that time from Margaret's life insurance. It was not a discussion. It was what you do. Mrs. Patterson came by with something baked every Friday for the first 2 months. She never asked for details. She just came. The neighbors who had nodded politely when Derek talked about his father-in-law reading things wrong went quiet. Not shame exactly. Just nothing left to say. I did not need them to say anything. The following March, Amy and I were sitting in the backyard on the first warm afternoon of the year. The grass was coming back. The fence looked better since I had repainted it in February. I needed a project, and it had needed doing. The copper watering can was gone. Amy had taken it down sometime in December and put it in the trash without saying anything about it. I understood. She asked if I wanted to go back to my house. She meant the old house, mine and Margaret's. I had kept it and rented it short-term because I could not bring myself to sell it yet. I looked at the yard, the fence I had painted, the porch steps I had resealed, the kitchen table inside where Marcus and I had sat with coffee the night after the arrest. I told Amy this was where I was, if she wanted me there. She looked at her coffee for a moment. Then she said she wanted me there. There was no ceremony, no moment built up around it, just my daughter telling me the truth on a March afternoon. We made breakfast together that morning. She did the eggs. I handled the toast. It was the same division of labor Margaret and I had used for 40 years. A small table, good light through the window, nobody else in the house. For the first time in a long time, quiet felt like something that belonged to us. For months, people had treated me like the suspicious father-in-law, the grieving man who saw things that were not there, the old man who needed to go to Florida and clear his head. But that November night, sitting on the floor of a dark attic, listening to my son-in-law shred his way out of his own life 1 page at a time, I thought about every one of those people. Your instincts do not need a second opinion before you are allowed to trust them. Sometimes trusting yourself is not the same as causing trouble. Sometimes it is the thing that keeps the people you love alive long enough for the truth to finally reach the front door.